Welcome back. So, today is something a little different. Um, I have been watching an awful lot of YouTube in quarantine and, surprising no one, been interested in getting into a few more hobbies. But as space is at a premium, my hobbies continue to get smaller and smaller. And in the tradition of one of these videos, I will be I will be getting a lot of my hand filing out of the way early on, and just a little bit later. But today I'm setting up a Japanese chisel blank. I got this from a site called Momokoya. Momokoya. They make a bunch of traditional Japanese metalsmithing tools, such as chisel blanks, tiny hammers. They even have some really neat metal alloys for fancy jewelry, I'm guessing. My jewelry currently is, while it's not as fancy, I am enjoying the ever-loving hell out of making it. But this is just a tool steel blank that they sell. It's like $5 for a pack of two. They are not paying me. That should not come as a surprise to anyone. Nobody pays me to do this. I pay me to do this. Anyway, all I'm doing is squaring up the blank, getting rid of the fire scale. The more I watch this, the less I'm convinced that I really even needed to do this to anything but sort of that last little tip there. I digress. Specifically, what I'm making today is a safety edge chisel. That'll become apparent later. But all that entails is making this rectangle a little ovoid, or ovular. That's not the right word. We're leaving that in. And then putting a bevel on it. The angle of this bevel, I didn't know when I started this, and I'll be honest, I don't know it now. It ended up working out okay, but I have more research to do. I found a couple of really good resources. And you're going to leave the camera adjustment in the final cut? That is a bold move. Bold move. Anyway, while I still have more research and learning to do, I was in a mood and I really just wanted to do this. If there's something that you want to do, crafting-wise, just do it. It doesn't have to be right the first time. It doesn't have to be right the 10th time. As long as you're learning while you do it, it's worth doing. Anyhow, the real reason I wanted to get into this was to see the back of my hand every stroke of a file. This angle is somewhat shallow, but it did end up working out, and it's really not a huge time or material or cost investment either. I am going back in and cleaning it up with a number 4 cut file, if I remember right. A really fancy jewelry file that I should definitely drag back and forth, but it's one less step to do after it's hardened. After it's hardened, I wouldn't be using this file. I would just be using diamonds. But aside from the focus not really catching it, it's pretty much good now. And it's just about ready for hardening. If I remember right, yeah, I'm going to take off just a stroke or two so the edge isn't paper thin when I go to harden it. Yeah, that's a me move right there. Hey, there's the focus. So yeah, just a little flat on there, just a little bit of security to make sure that edge doesn't get, too carburized or cooked or whatever the technical term is for it. And then I'm going in and taking off the sort of harsh transition. Right, rounding off these angles makes it a safety edge chisel. And as I've found out later on, safety edge chisel doesn't mean you can't dig into something. It means it's much safer when you go to remove material. I have switched away to a slightly more aggressive file. If anybody is wondering, hand filing is fantastic. It's wonderful. It's soothing when it isn't making the sound that is 1,000 cats jumping into a roaring chalkboard fire. Then it's well worth it. You want to make sure that sound doesn't come out. If you wonder what a roaring chalkboard fire sounds like, you're in the right place, because here it is. No, I'm not even going to pretend to add it. That's cruel and wrong. So those edges are mostly rounded out. I'm rambling. We're pretty close to about an under 10-minute project to take a small rectangle of steel and turn it into a functional chisel. For it to be functional, though, it has to be heat treated. Any day now. Any day now. The lily is being gilded, which is a euphemism for not heat treating something. But while I might have forgotten that I left all of this filing in, I did want to thank the new subscribers that came by over this last month. It was like 30 of you in a month, which is the biggest growth I've ever seen. So legitimately, thank you. I completely undid making the edge completely flat, didn't I? Yep, I brought it right back to a sharp edge, undoing the safety of what I had done before. My logic confuses me sometimes, I'll be honest. It's been a few weeks since I've recorded this, and this gives me a chance to reflect on really what my process is and what the hell I'm doing with my life. The answer to both of those is my process is ever-changing, and what I'm doing with my life is trying to stay afloat. So far, so good. Could be worse. So my goal is to get it to a cherry red heat. I turned off all the lights that I could while staying relatively safe, and then dunking it in water. Since the piece is so small, there's almost no chance that I will catastrophically mess this up. Taking off some of the oxides to see the temper colors that I'm about to do. Keep in mind that anytime you have to redo a heat treat, it's not great, but it's not that big a deal if you not that big a deal if you mess up, because you probably have two tries before you start getting iffy. And I don't know why that's a feeling. That is not a fact that I can say for certain. The temper colors that I'm looking for is a straw yellow at the end of this, and it's really hard to see just what color everything is. I need much better lighting for when I'm doing this. Unfortunately, I got what I got. But we're right there about now, and dunking it into water to freeze it is what I need to be doing. Interesting. I can see the color better on the video than I could while I was sitting there in person. Nice. Yeah, that is roughly the color that you're looking for. I'm only going to be engraving copper for the most part, especially to practice. So even if it's just a smidge over, it's really not going to make a big deal for what I'm doing. It's super quick to sharpen. It's super quick to do again if I needed to do it. And just like that, well, almost just like that, after a little bit of honing and wondering, am I doing anything correctly in my life? Sometimes. The inaugural test. When in doubt, use wood because you're scared. if it's not abundantly clear. I have never engraved something like this in earnest. But this convinced me that this was worth both videoing and recording. But to keep myself honest in what the hell actually happened. But also that this was fun enough that I would actually like to keep doing it. It made a decent sort of clean V in there. You can only really carve with the you can only really carve with the corner of it, but that is a functional chisel for wood. Let's make ourselves a little copper test piece. If I had any kind of forethought into this, I would have had this ready, and I would have known what I was going to pretend to try to engrave in it. This is the land of impulse, not the land of foresight. So, with a terrible setup for doing this, this is the very first cut that this file made into metal. Thrilling, I know. I am actually really excited by this. This is sort of a revelation that this does work, and I can actively experiment on this while sort of both having fun and learning at the same time. That should be the goal of many projects that aren't being done for money. You should have fun and learn. Those two things tend to produce a lot of serotonin. Again, no foresight on what I'm doing, but the process of just tapping a line into a piece of copper is really, really neat. I would say I'd get my hand out of the shot, but I think my fingers are gorgeous. Disclaimer, I don't think that my fingers are gorgeous. They are just normal fingers. Thank you. But this chisel, in combination with other techniques and ideas like texturing copper before engraving something into it, I understand a little more why it's called... I didn't tell you what it's called. It's fine. This is called the iron brush, and there's a Japanese word for it that I don't know off the top of my head, and I think that's okay right now. I am still a hobbyist version of a hobbyist. It's more like painting than it is anything else. It's painting and carving, so you're just trying to get light to reflect off of something how you need it to, not necessarily trying to do a bunch of not just line work, but like the style of engraving with the really cool like flowers and flourishes. I don't remember the name of them for the life of me. I remember horrible details about work, about absolutely everything else. But this one, I'm drawing a blank. If I remember it by the end, I'll just scream the word, and then you'll just have to deal with that. So later on, much later on after this video, I did find that having the chisel pointed towards me gave me a bit better control. Here, I sort of gave up on it really quick. I really wasn't sort of feeling it at the moment, but my current setup being not as ideal as it is, I couldn't really get my hand around the piece. Another method for doing this is to embed the piece you're working on in either pitch, or I found Go Meow Creations. You should go watch him. Dude's rad. He made he did this, or he did an engraving setup using these moldable pellets that just, when they get warm, you can mold them. But it's perfect for like this engraving and repoussé sort of stuff. I'm gonna guess it's good for repoussé. I don't actually know how well it will form around being hammered into a lot. I digress. We're going in fast mode here. I've decided to make a bunch of tiger lines and see why. You can see that the metal is deforming both inward, and if it catches wrong, the chisel really won't have as much cutting power as it needs to get... I'm not even saying it right. So yeah, with a less than ideal setup, hammering it back to shape is a good call. Also, I decided to give the front face the flat area some texture so that I can see better the lines that I'm making in it. Ford Hallam would call this putting a skin on it. I call it putting a texture on it because I have less experience. And also, this is work hardening the ever-loving crap out of it, which gives a little bending insurance. I also work a lot in 3D, so the word texture is much more natural than skin. It's got a good normal map, if you know what I mean. So this helps me see the lines a little better. It also sort of softens the edges just a little bit of what I had already carved. But getting back into it, this is a decent test for, like, how do I control these lines? Just making a bunch of straight lines is an exercise in and of itself. None of these are particularly straight, and none of them are particularly even in line weight and thickness. But that in and of itself gives it a sort of unique texture and feel. And you can also see the pieces bending already, so even work hardened, this process is not meant for this style of vise. I believe I would encourage anybody who does any kind of metalwork or jewelry work to give this a shot, because this is much different than a power engraver or anything of that kind. It's a neat little test. And it's really satisfying. Like, the shape of the engraved lines are these sort of V grooves, and the little curls of metal that come off of it aren't like, there's so little dust involved in making in carving those lines. I'm a big fan of anything that doesn't make dust. So here's this piece that makes a bunch of dust. Yeah. It's also a really good test of your jewelry saw skills to freehand something without drawing any lines on it. And by a really good test, I mean it's actually kind of stupid. Always draw something on there, because then you'll have to do a lot more file work and make a lot more dust. I am saving all of these scraps for a mega meltdown someday, and either casting it into something or just making a big hunk of copper. So, as I promised, there is more hand filing. There's always going to be more hand filing. If you don't like hand filing, I understand. But you should try it anyway, and then learn to like it. I'm not being held at gunpoint by a file right now. That would be silly. I realized you can't see me blink when I am asking for help. Anyway. So, I'm just making a teardrop shape. Something that would go into a pendant. I've gotten a little bit better at making shapes that I think are cooler for pendants, but I haven't done as much engraving as I would like to. My next goals are potentially inlaying a piece of metal into something else, like a not a mortise and tenon, like a proper inlay, like metal into metal, which is way harder than wood into wood, as there's so much less give, and it's not forgiving. Hand filing is a nice time. Especially this right here. You go in and you knock off that corner and you see this little flash of metal, and it's just pretty. It's just pretty. There's no downside to this. But all I'm doing is rounding off the edges with a pretty fine file. I don't really want to have to go in with sandpaper as a finish on this. Even though I will use some later, it's super fine and only for something that's about to happen. I 100% cut myself on working on this piece too. So remember to just file safely, kids. This is not a video for children. So yeah, that's roughly as much work as I want to do for a test piece. But I find it satisfying enough to continue going through the next steps. Drill a hole in it. Really put your back into it. Yeah, that's about right. So there's, that no, you're doing fine. Cool. Remember, there's nothing that a hammer can't fix, other than something being too hammered. Or brain damage. It can make brain damage. Just deburring the inside of that hole with a drill bit. I did find my deburring tool after this. Or, sorry, a chamfer tool or countersink. I remembered the word countersink. But just taking the edge off of the inside of that and oxidizing it with some Jack's Copper Brown Black. Again, if it's not obvious that I'm not being paid by anybody, I would like to make it more obvious and state that I'm not being paid by anyone. The really fresh cuts in the copper don't have any oils or oxides in them, so they get black super, super quick. I really like that, and I'm going to try to use it to my advantage in future projects. Next, though, I'm going to patina it with sort of green. It's a copper green or copper green blue, something like that. And you just let it dry, and the drier it gets, the more green and blue oxides form. The ones inside of the cuts ended up being much, much greener, and I super want to use that to my advantage in future projects too. One thing is, though, it's not too strongly, what's the word? It's not adhered to it very strong. If I clear coated it, it would be much more permanent, but I don't have clear coat, and I wanted to see what it looked like when I knocked off. I wanted to see what stayed in the cracks and sort of took the finest piece of sandpaper I had on hand and knock a lot of it away. Sort of like using it like an ink wash. You get in the cracks and crevices and the creases and crevices, and then everything else comes up copper. I think that's really neat. It would be prettier if it was better planned, but for a first attempt at making a chisel, engraving, and doing things that I already knew how to do, I feel really comfortable with how this came out. I hope anybody that watched this got something out of it, even if what they got out of it was to just make something. Thank you for your time, and thank you for watching. Stay safe out there, and I will make more stuff later. Bye.